Hello, everyone. Those of you who are tuning in, which is just one of you right now. Hello, Dr. Lion. Thanks for tuning in. My city's currently on fire, so those of you who are normally from here may not be around for the time being, but that's okay. We're still going to talk about the Roman Republic because... oh, wait, hang on. There are some other people here. All right. Yeah, like I said in my email a couple of weeks ago, I thought I wanted to talk about the fall of Rome, but I realized that starting at the end, I know you're all very smart people, I know you're educated, I know you know about Rome, but, not everybody knows everything. I do know your name, Dr. Lion 23, friend of the show. Welcome. I figured, it would probably be more productive and interesting to start from the beginning or closer to, especially since as I was starting to do research for this, I realized that there was a lot more of interest in Republican Rome. I don't normally like to talk here in these lectures about ancient history so much, especially Roman history, for a couple of reasons. One, because it's been done to death. There's not really anything interesting or new to learn. And also because the nature of the sources means that you're really just sort of regurgitating events as written down by Livy or Polybius or whoever, which is fine. It's just not terribly interesting to me. But I wanted to talk about this because there are some interesting things about Republican history. Obviously, there's a ton of interesting things about Roman Republican history. However, this is not going to be the best version of it that you are ever going to get. I'm going to do my very best, but there's a lot to cover, and I'm definitely going to crunch some important things down. So, I want to recommend the History of Rome podcast if you really, really want to hear all about, in great, beautiful detail, Roman history. And also, if you want to just have a good time, the Rome TV show is pretty good. There are tons of great histories on this. SPQR by Mary Beard is a great one. But I'm going to try to cover as much as I can, and hopefully we can have some fun with this and talk about Rome and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So Rome. What is Rome? Where did it begin? Well, according to the Romans themselves, who should under no circumstances be trusted about anything, but we're gonna go with their semi-mythological beginnings because it's more interesting that way. According to the Romans, Rome was founded in 753 BCE on the banks of the river Tiber in Italy by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus, who, if you've read the Aeneid, will know are descendants of the Trojan prince Aeneas. They were also the grandsons of the Latin king Numitor of Alba Longa. This is the critical myth making of Rome. According to this legend, Numitor's daughter Rhea Silvia was the twins' mother, and she had been raped and impregnated by Mars, the god of war. And so the twins were half divine. According to the legend, after the king was deposed, the twins were in danger, and they were rescued by a she-wolf, sometimes it's a shepherd's wife, raised, and then they returned the throne of Alba Longa to Numitor. They founded their own city, and then I guess they fought over where to have it, and Romulus killed Remus, and voila, you have Rome. This is the as close as we got to the truth. Who the Romans were, where they came from. There's lots of different theories and archaeological evidence, and this is almost certainly, obviously not true, but good enough. Who cares? We'll go with it. Speaking of things that are close enough, let's talk about the last king of Rome. So for the first 200 years of Roman history, it was ruled by kings, Etruscan kings, and eventually the people of Rome decided they'd had enough of that. The last king of Rome was a guy named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, also known as Tarquin the Proud. Again, this is semi-legendary, but he was away on campaign. He was fighting in 509 BCE when his son Sextus Tarquinius reportedly raped a noblewoman, Lucretia, at knife point. She revealed this offense to some of the other Roman nobility, and then, in shame, committed suicide. The Roman nobleman, led by one Lucius Junius Brutus, went to the people, to the nobility, and gained the power to expel the king and his family and to institute a republic. This is Brutus here, swearing an oath. You can see in the background the dead Lucretia. Part of the reason why I want to do this and why this is fun is that the Renaissance painters and artists were just super horny for ancient Rome. They just loved to paint and sculpt and depict these events, and so there's a lot of exciting paintings to draw from. The rape of Lucretia is one pretty famous event, of which there are dozens and dozens of paintings and sculptures, and this is one. And so over Lucretia's body, Brutus and his cadre of conspirators conspire. Ooh, that was a really good alliteration. I'm really proud of that. Hang on. Conspire to throw out Tarquin, and they do, and they swear an oath that they would suffer no man to rule Rome, and so the people desirous of a new liberty would never again be swayed by the entreaties or bribes of a king. This establishes the Roman Republic. The Senatus Popularis Quaestrum Romanorum. Sorry, I think I actually forgot the middle one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. SBQR. And there are actually three branches of the Roman Republic. There are the assemblies, which are composed of the people, a form of direct democracy, and theoretically the core of political power, with the authority to elect magistrates and accept laws, administer justice, and declare war, critically. There's the Senate, which officially advises the magistrates, and theoretically doesn't actually have that much political authority, but as we'll see later, that's not actually true. And then the magistrates themselves. And so the magistrates are the elected servants, essentially, and exercise most religious, military, and judicial powers. In practice, however, the Senate was the body with the real power in Rome. So immediately, Republican Rome finds that it has a problem with its neighboring tribes, Latin towns and villages, enemies like the Sabines, their Etruscans and Latin neighbors. And so they fight a series of wars over the next 100 years, 500 to 400 or so, in order to consolidate their power. At the end of this period, the Gallic chieftain Brennus defeats the Romans and sacks the city, but they recover. Again, this is actually not super important, but speaking of Renaissance painters being horny for something, the rape of the Sabine women is another very famous scene wherein the Romans, who are apparently in need of women, go to the Sabine towns and abduct all of their women. This doesn't matter at all, but I think it's interesting. The phrase or the term "rape of the Sabine women" is a translation of the Latin word raptio. It probably means, in context, kidnapping or abduction rather than sexual assault. But whatever. Rape of the Sabine women. Tons of paintings. Check it out. At the end of this period, Rome essentially has control of most of central Italy and is pretty secure. There are no serious opponents at the time. However, we have to talk about the Roman Constitution a little bit in order to understand what happens next, which is that was sort of generally called the conflict of the orders. And this begins essentially basically as soon as the Republic is founded. Rome is divided into two social classes, the patricians and the plebeians. Plebeians, by the way, nobody knows how to pronounce Latin, so don't come at me for my pronunciation. Close enough. Anyway, so the patricians are noble families. The plebeians are not. They were commoners, right? So just think of patricians as elites, nobles, and plebeians as common folk. And both theoretically had roles within the government. As you can see, there was a council of plebs, which elected the plebeian tribunes, tribune of the plebs, and the plebeian aediles, and other things. In practice, however, especially early on, the Senate had most of the actual power in society. And being that the plebeians made up the greater part of the Roman population, they did a lot of the fighting and dying. And so as early as 494, there was a series of essentially strikes where the plebs decided to, in the middle of a war, not do the war anymore. And so over time, the plebs were able to extract some concessions from the patricians, and then eventually, in theory, they had a substantial veto in the tribune of the plebs and were able to pass laws on their own. And again, in theory, had real political power. However, in practice, this conflict of the orders comes to an end sometime in the mid-3rd century with the passage of some laws that protect plebeian power. But in practice, what really happened was that a new patrician plebeian aristocracy sort of emerged, where enough plebeians became rich and they were able to sort of create an alliance with the old nobility and form sort of just an informal social class. And part of this was enforced by property laws. The patricians, so the top two ranks of society, the patricians and the equites, the knights, as well as the first class of property owners, had in the Comites Centuria, one of the popular assemblies, had more votes than the entire rest of Rome. So in practice, the richest, 10% of society could just sort of prevent anything of consequence from being voted upon or being acted upon. And so even though, again, theoretically, all Romans had a vote, in all ways that really mattered, only the wealthy, and especially people with property. If you did not have property, you were a proletariat and essentially useless. You may recognize this term. Don't worry, we'll come back to it. Yes, the arrows are distraction. The Roman Republic is a just hideous mess of norms and, ceremony. In practice, none of it really mattered, depending on whether or not you were able to do what you wanted with the power that you had. We'll come back to that. But just sort of bear in mind the plebeians and the patricians and the equites, equestrians, the knights, as we go forward. The next sort of big conflict that the Romans have to deal with is... Oh, hang on, sorry. Where am I? Here we go. Is the... yeah. In theory and in practice, yeah. In all ways that mattered, it was not really a republic. And it became less so over time. The next big enemy that the Rome had to deal with were the Samnites. And this is also not a particularly important conflict. These are fought between around 343 and 290 BCE. And the Samnites were a southern Italian tribe. One of the interesting things about this is the Battle of Caudine Forks, which I think is an interesting moment. The Romans are essentially tricked and trapped by the Samnites in a sort of narrow ravine and forced to surrender and give up their arms and march underneath a yoke, which you can see here in this image, humiliating them. However, The Romans went home, built up a new army, and then utterly obliterated the Samnites, which I think is sort of a useful lesson, right? Because nobody knows who the fuck the Samnites are anymore, and everybody knows who the Romans are. So, as low as you ever might think that you are, just, I guess, you can take a lot of good things and bad things away from Rome, but, it's never, it's never over. Caudine Forks, Caudine, Caudine Forks. After this, however, things get really interesting in Rome because they start to act as more of a regional power. And between 264 BCE and 146 BCE, they fight 3 wars with Carthage. These are called the Punic Wars. You've probably heard of them. The first was fought over. It was sort of a war for territory, a war of alliances in Sicily, where sort of an independent city-state was basically essentially always at war with Carthage, and Rome wanted to prevent their expansion. This ended pretty successfully for Rome. They, secured territory and drove the Carthaginians out of Sicily. The second one is the one that you've probably heard of, the Second Punic War. After their defeat in Rome, the Carthaginians realized they needed to expand a little bit to stay ahead of the curve, and they established some territory in Spain, Iberia, led largely by Hannibal Barca, a son of Hamilcar, and a young tactical genius, by all accounts, one of the greatest generals ever to have lived. After pushing back and forth in the in the late 2nd century, Hannibal and the Romans declare war on each other, and Romans prepare to sail to Africa to make war on the Carthaginians. However, Hannibal, bravely, boldly, as you've probably heard, crosses the Alps unexpectedly with 20,000 men, a handful of elephants, and some cavalry, and whoops ass up and down the Italian peninsula, delivering a crushing defeat to the Romans at Cannae. However, Hannibal is not able to fully secure his victory and defeat Rome once and for all. And Scipio Africanus, the great general, defeats him on the field of battle finally and puts an end to Carthage's sort of any Carthaginian attempt at being a regional power. I skipped over this, but the Carthaginians are a Phoenician people group. Their language was called the Punic language. That's why they're the Punic Wars. And they were essentially sort of like a coalition of city-states. North Africa, Spain, parts of the Mediterranean. Anyway, in between this and the last Punic War, Rome almost, as an afterthought, conquers Greece. They had gone to war with Greece a couple of different times, but this time they made good on it and defeated what was left of Alexander's, dying and collapsing empire, and made it part of Rome. A part of the peace settlement in the Second Carthaginian War was a pretty substantial indemnity, 10,000 talents that the Carthaginians had to pay, and then the Romans essentially ginned up a reason to attack over a failure to pay the indemnity on time or something like that. And in the Third Punic War, besieged Carthage, demanded that Carthage move its city inland away from the sea and abandon its harbor. The Carthaginians refused, so they burned the city to the ground, took the Carthaginians as as the story goes, salted the earth so that it could never be fertile again. Whether or not this actually happened is subject to interpretation, but it makes a good story. One of the things that does happen, though, is that people like Scipio Africanus at this time realize that it is quite profitable and good for your career to do wars. You get to go and you kick somebody's ass and you bring a bunch of stuff back. You're very popular. And so the war making continues. Not, however, without some road bumps. Specifically, there start to be an awful lot of slave revolts around this time. Rome has been expanding rapidly, and its slave population boosts substantially, especially in Sicily, which Rome conquers and begins to settle largely by slaves. The rapid expansion also has the effect of destabilizing Rome's social organization and triggers unrest. A lot of the public land, it gets divided up among large landholders and speculators, who then expand their estates by forcing peasants off the farms and working them with slaves. These peasants go back to Rome and they're forced into idleness, where they have to subsist on handouts because there's no paid work. Anyway, so after the expulsion of the Carthaginians in the Second Punic War, speculators from Italy rush to the island, buy up huge tracts of land, and fill them with slaves. And the First Servile War happens during this time, led by Eunice, an escaped slave. It does not succeed. The Romans kill them all. However, this is just the first of 3. And we'll come back to that. And this is one of the many problems facing the now burgeoning mature empire, or imperial power of Rome. And into this mix emerge the Grakkai. These are the brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. These are they were plebeians. However, they were members of an old and noble family. Their father was Tiberius Gracchus the Elder, who had been tribune of the plebs, praetor, consul, and censor, well-loved, well-liked. And their mother was Cornelia, who was daughter of the hero Scipio Africanus. So these were well pedigreed young men, Gaius and Tiberius. And Tiberius was elected to the office of the tribune of the plebs in 133 BCE. So if you'll remember, the tribune of the plebs has... I didn't mention this. Tribune of the plebs, its big thing is it has veto power. It has the... this is established at the end of the conflict of the orders. It can veto legislation. It can veto actions. It essentially acts, in theory, as a stopgap for overreach by the Senate. In practice, it was not used as much. But Tiberius says, he has a different idea. And so he puts together sort of a political coalition, and he begins pushing for a program of land reform, essentially redistributing land from the speculators and the large landholders to the increasingly impoverished veterans, peasants, and people of Rome. He does this by using rarely invoked powers that had been put in place hundreds of years before for the Patrician Council. He's essentially violating long-standing norms, though he does not do anything explicitly illegal right away. And he establishes a commission to oversee the redistribution of land to people who need it. However, this is alarming to even the liberal senators in the Senate, who feared that their own lands would be confiscated. They arranged for other tribunes to oppose the reforms. Tiberius then went to the people themselves, arguing, and this is actually in the Constitution of Rome, a tribune that opposes the will of the people in favor of the rich is not a true tribune. This is, again, one of the things that a tribune is supposed to do legally is represent the will of the people. So Tiberius remains in power. His reform goes forward. So the senators, left with few legal options, threaten to prosecute Tiberius after his term has ended. So he has to stand for a second term, a thing that is generally not done. This is opposed by these senators, who, fearing Tiberius, dispense with the constitutional shenanigans, gather a force of thugs, march to the forum, and then beat Tiberius and 300 of his supporters to death. Bummer for Tiberius. But don't worry, we're not done with the Grakkai just yet. 10 years later, in 123 BCE, Gaius, or Tiberius's brother Gaius, takes the same office. tribune of the plebs. He revives the land program, not that Tiberius, different Tiberius, and revives the land program, gaining support from both the rural poor and the urban poor, with popular reforms. He even reaches out to the equestrians, who had not quite been senators. They were, again, the lower rank of patricians. So he's trying to build a coalition across all sorts of social lines to get his political agenda passed. And he's very successful. He's much more savvy than his brother Tiberius was. He fixes price on grains. He grants improvements in citizenship for Latins and others outside the city of Rome, which is where he fucks up. Unfortunately, a substantial proportion of the Roman poor really liked the privileges that were granted to them by Roman citizenship, and they were not excited about the idea of it being extended to the Roman allies. With this overstep, Gaius's popular support waned, and the consul Lucius Opimius, in a really unfortunate echo of what had just happened, raises a mob to assassinate Gaius. Gaius, knowing that his death is imminent, commits suicide on the Aventine Hill in 121 BCE. All of his reforms are undermined except for the grain laws, and 3,000 of his supporters are arrested and put to death for going along with him. So it didn't go great for the Grakkai, but they tried. Respect to them for that. Unfortunately, because of the constitutional changes that the Grakkai had tried to implement to allow their reforms to go through, it opened the door for other people, less scrupulous men, to take advantage of them. And one such man was Gaius Marius. So, starting a few years after the death of Gaius Gracchus, there's a series of wars. First against a guy named Jugurtha in Namibia, who essentially declares independence from Rome, and then a coalition of Teutonic Germanic people, mostly known as the Cimbri. These are the Cimbrian Wars. It is required that essentially the Roman armies are mobilized nonstop for the next 30 years or so as they try to deal with Jugurtha, the Cimbri, revolts, all sorts of things. And out of this emerges a man named Gaius Marius. Marius is declared consul. Consul is, again, the position, essentially the executive position in Rome. There are two in order to have a sort of a balance of power. And the consul is generally the person responsible for executing and prosecuting wars. And Marius is real good at this. Marius is a great general, a famous general, a very popular general. And unfortunately, during this time, there are just not enough Romans to do the wars that need to be done. And so Marius introduces some reforms. Up until this point, one must have a certain amount of property in order to serve in the army. But that is just no longer viable if you want to keep making war against Jugurtha and the Cimbri. So first they reduce it, and then they entirely do away with the property requirements to serve in the Roman military, which means that suddenly you have a huge proletarian army, which is in essence loyal only to their general because their pay comes entirely from loot and the proceeds of the war. There is not a salary or not a regular one right away. And so starting with Marius, there is a huge professional army that is extremely loyal to their generals because their generals pay them. Marius was also very, very good at doing war, and so in order to protect the Republic, he is repeatedly elected to the position of consul, which violates Roman law, which theoretically, again, mandates a decade between consulships. This weakens, again, what appears to be a society based entirely upon norms and custom. So, by around 100 BCE, large armed gangs are running through Rome, engaging in street violence. A candidate for high office, Gaius Memmius, is assassinated, and so Marius is called upon as consul to suppress the violence. And, you know, this starts a long tradition of Roman generals showing up in Rome and doing violence. His landless legionaries affected voting in that they were often intimidating voters or would directly influence the outcome of elections. And though this was seen as necessary for the survival of Rome, it put unprecedented power into the hands of a single man. Now, in 91, after decades of fighting against the Cimbri and the Teutones and Jugurtha, some of Rome's Italian allies get tired of not having citizenship and they revolt. These are the Sabines and the Samnites and the Latins and the Etruscans, and they rebel over the lack of citizenship. This is called the Social War. Marius had already been consul 6 times. He was incredibly popular, and so the Senate could not allow him to prosecute this war. So they give it to a man named Sulla. And Sulla, who had also made his name fighting against Jugurtha, against the Cimbri and the Teutones, does a great fucking job, and everybody loves Sulla. And suddenly you have 2 very popular, very wealthy, very powerful men competing for essentially domination of Roman society, Roman political life. And also at this time, the king of Pontus, which is sort of where it's in Turkey now, but it's the northern side, northeastern Turkey, whatever, doesn't matter. A guy named Mithridates, a great name. I wish I could talk about Mithridates more. Fun to say Mithridates, but I can only give him a little bit of time. Anyway, he attacks some Roman provinces, and again, they cannot send, or rather, they send Marius. They can't send Marius at first, but they send Sulla, and Sulla's doing a great job. But then, and I can't go into the details because it's too boring. But whatever. There's basically some political shenanigans, and Sulla is recalled so that Marius can be consul and do the war. And at this time, this is basically the opportunity to prosecute a war in Rome is an incredible honor. You get rich, you get powerful, you become successful, you get a parade whenever you come back. It's called a triumph. And so this is a huge, not only like, slight on Sulla's honor, but also a direct attack on his political standing, which cannot stand. And so Sulla and Marius represent 2 political factions in Rome, the Optimates and the Populares. The Optimates essentially are conservatives. They want to establish power in the Senate and stop reform and keep things the way they are. The Populares are reformists. They want to reform society to be a little bit more equal. Most of these, however, these are just political jockeying tools. These are all just men who want personal power. But these are the 2 factions. And so Sulla and Marius are now in essentially open war with each other. Sulla marches on Rome. Marius tries to put together a defense with gladiators, which sounds super cool, but it doesn't work, so it's not that interesting. But Sulla drives him out. Sulla institutes a ton of constitutional reforms at this time. The broad direction of these reforms is to concentrate political power into the Senate and the aristocratic assemblies while reducing the powers of the tribune and the plebeian council. Not great, right? There's more civil war with Sulla. Sulla actually manages to retire. It is there's a lot of legal nonsense around this about why anybody is allowed to do anything. There's a special Roman office called dictator, which is somebody is elected to in times of a military emergency. Sulla and Marius are both dictators at certain times, and this is just it is used as precedent to bring troops into Rome and do violence to Roman citizens, that sort of thing. Again, this is what you're probably noticing is that you can have all the constitution and laws and republican virtues as you like, but in the end, political power is about political power, right? It's about exercising your ability to make things happen, right? It's about the control and use of violence. And at a certain point, powerful men in Rome stop trying to pretend and just start openly doing things. More on that later. So Sulla and Marius exit the picture, leaving the Roman Republic in a real teetering place. And at this time, we get the Third Servile War, which begins in 73 BCE when some slave gladiators escape from a school in Capua. They defeat a Roman force sent against them. They are joined by over 100,000 men, women, and children. At one point, they defeat a consul that is sent after them by rappelling down the side of Mount Vesuvius and surprising them. And the leader of this is a person that you may have heard of, the gladiator general Spartacus. So Spartacus and his army of 100,000 men, women, and children roam up and down the countryside, looting and pillaging and basically causing all kinds of problems. At the time, the Roman legions are busy fighting with Mithridates. They're busy putting down a different revolt in Spain. And so initially, the slaves and the gladiators have immense success. Unfortunately, eventually Rome gets tired of this shit. They raise 8 legions under the leadership of Marcus Licinius Crassus, who you may have heard of. And Crassus defeats Spartacus and his troops and crucifies 6,000 of them on the road to Rome, just so this doesn't happen again, which it sort of doesn't. Bummer for Spartacus. However, this puts everybody in kind of a difficult position. The problems home at Rome have not been solved. And into the mix emerges Gaius Julius Caesar, nephew of a very powerful, scion of a very powerful Roman family and a very popular young man already. He had been, during Sulla's dictatorship, he had successfully executed a large number of political enemies, one of whom was supposed to be Gaius Julius Caesar, but he escaped. He was the nephew, of Gaius Marius, so already well-known and well-popular. He was also, at the time, Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of the Roman religion. At the same time, emerging out of the war with Sertorius Mithridates and a campaign against a large group of pirates out of Sicilia, not Sicily, Sicilia, it's on the southeastern part of Turkey, is Pompey Magnus, another very popular, wealthy, and successful general. So between Crassus, Caesar, and Pompey Magnus, they form what is called the First Triumvirate. And you have Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus from my left to right. And this essentially is a power-sharing agreement. Each of them could, if they wanted to, gather together a faction of political power and cause all sorts of trouble. And so their agreement is to share power. And as part of this, Caesar is granted consulship of Gaul and allowing him to carry out a campaign of conquest. Those of you who have been listening to me talk for a long time may remember that years ago I gave a talk on Vercingetorix, the king of the Gauls, last king of the Gauls, defeated by Gaius Julius Caesar at Elysia. This is a really interesting person, a really interesting campaign, really interesting story. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to go over it. Needless to say, the Caesar rampages through Gaul, what is now France, defeats the Gauls at Elysia with a really cool strategy where he builds a donut fortification. He builds a wall surrounding Elysia and then a wall surrounding his fortifications so the Gauls can't get in or out. Defeats Vercingetorix, who surrenders to him, and making Caesar incredibly rich and incredibly popular and very successful among his men. However, as I mentioned, Pompey is also very successful and very popular among his men, and his commands in the east had made him extremely powerful. His achievements could not officially be recognized. They were so substantial, but also he couldn't be sent away to win more victories. So he had to sort of just like putter around Rome while Caesar was winning victories. And this creates tension between Caesar and between Pompey, a serious tension. And to secure the triumvirate, Caesar had married his daughter Julia to Pompey. Unfortunately, Julia dies in, I think, around 51, 52 CE. The senators start to fear Caesar more than they fear Pompey. They demand that he cannot stand for consul unless he turns over control of his armies to the state, which would have left Caesar defenseless before his enemies. So he chooses to ignore this command. He sends an ultimatum to the Senate, which they reject, and then they pass a resolution. This is in 49 CE, declaring that if Caesar does not lay down his arms by July, he would be considered an enemy of the Republic. They make Pompey their champion against Caesar, and essentially make Pompey a dictator again. From here, you know what happens. Caesar crosses the Rubicon. The die is cast. He fights an extensive civil war over the remaining 5 years against Pompey first, and then agents of the Senate, which he then wins, making himself essentially a dictator, sole consul, dictator for life. Depending on how much you want to believe Caesar's own writings, there's an argument to be made that, statement from man stabbed. What are they going to do? Stab me? As it turns out, yes. Depending on what you want to believe, it could be that Julius Caesar intended to restore the Senate and step down magnanimously from his position as dictator, as did Cincinnatus so many years ago. However, I think that it is pretty clear from the context that Julius was going to essentially make himself king of Rome. Many senators come to worry about this, and so they form a conspiracy led by, in a beautiful turn of symmetry, Marcus Junius Brutus, a descendant of the very first Brutus, who overthrew the first king of Rome. On the Senate floor, these senators gather together and they assassinate Gaius Julius Caesar, sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. This is not technically the end of the Republic, though this is generally sort of like where it's marked as the official end of the Republic is, 17 years later when Gaius Julius Caesar's nephew, Caesar Augustus, declares himself imperator and begins the Roman Empire. But I guess sort of like what I want to point out is that, if you've been listening, the Republic has been dead for a while, right? Like, there's still the vestiges of political power. There's still, the pomp and circumstance. But in practice, Rome has been a series of dictatorships and, power sharing agreements for close to 50 years. And at the best of times, it was always an oligarchy. The de facto power was always with the wealthy, even though the people had, theoretically, voting power. Russell Crowe comes later. I will hopefully talk about the Empire, where we will get to Commodus and the not real General Maximus at some point. The greatest emperor, Marcus Aurelius, called so because he wrote down things that flattered later rulers. Anyway, the point is, I actually don't want to... I mean, if you've been listening, you probably recognize some parallels, perhaps, to the present day. And I don't want to lean too hard on those, because Rome is not America. America is not Rome. But, I do think there is a lot of interesting stuff to be learned very broadly, or some interesting parallels to be drawn about how people respond to political and economic disenfranchisement, and how fraught the process of reform is, right? How ferociously the forces of reaction, how the oligarchy, how the wealthy will defend what's theirs. And again, America is not Rome. If I were going to say that America is Rome, I would unfortunately say that we were somewhere in between, the Grakkai and Sulla, right? I don't know that we have had our Sulla yet, but I would say that if things don't change, we will get a Sulla, and we will get one before long. This is I think the main takeaway for me as I was rereading this stuff was don't rely on norms to keep your republic together. You have to embody the people with power, right? You have to give the citizenry the ability to affect their own political destiny. If you don't, then either they will tear you apart, or they will empower, a strong man to do so for them. Rome, unlike us, did not have the benefit of historical republics to draw lessons from, right? This was not the first time it was happening, but definitely a more unique series of circumstances. And so, as their society was decaying, they didn't have the benefit of being able to look back and draw lessons. And another way that America is not Rome is that the people who, there were plenty of useless fail sons in the Senate, but the people who ended up as dictator or consul tended to be quite competent. American politicians are a bag of dumb shits, just like top to bottom, feckless, useless assholes. So that's definitely a distinct difference between the late Roman Republic and America. So I think I've just shot my own thesis in the foot, which is not to compare Rome and America. And this lecture has been going on for close to an hour. But that's all I've got. Anybody got any questions for me before I go and feel angry about Rome and America? Possibly go yell at the cops? I think there's a delay on the chat, so I'm going to... actually, this is a great question. There's a consul... What's his name? There's a consul... The consul who takes away Sulla's control of the war against Mithridates. I can't remember his name. Is definitely like a Mitch McConnell type. He just tanks the whole fucking republic for some petty, political point. It's absolute, just an incredible self-own, just a really just terrible idea. There are a lot of Mitch McConnells of the late Republic. All right, I will see you all next week. Thank you for tuning in. Stay safe out there, stay healthy, and good night.